Welcome to this explainer, everyone. Today, we are strapping on our historical detective hats and doing some serious investigation. If you're grinding through your UPSC prep, or honestly, if you just have a real thirst for understanding exactly how we piece together the past, you are in the exact right place. We're going to dig into the foundational sources of ancient Indian history. We aren't just looking at what happened, but how we literally know it happened. Okay, think about this for a sec. We confidently throw around statements like Gupta Maurya ascended the throne in 322 BC, but how do we actually know that, right? There wasn't some modern wall calendar hanging up in his palace. Finding the answer to this is honestly like cracking a massive ancient cold case. You have to match physical clues with literature and foreign diaries. It's an incredible puzzle, and by the end of this explainer, you're going to know exactly how historians cracked it. So let's lay out our evidence board for today. First, the idea of ancient India. 2. Unearthing physical clues. 3. Indian literary sources. 4. The foreign accounts. And finally, 5. Fixing the chronology. All right, diving right into section 1, the idea of ancient India and defining the subcontinent. You know, before it was the modern nation-state we're all familiar with, the ancient name of India was Bharatavarsha, named after the ancient Bharata tribe, and the people were known as Bharata Santati. What's truly fascinating here for us to grasp is this ancient concept of unity and diversity. The text celebrated this ultimate ideal of Chakravartins, these universal monarchs. When we look at rulers like Asoka back in the 3rd century BC or Samudragupta in the 4th century AD, it's just incredible to see how they achieved this near pan-India rule. They literally turned a geographical idea into a hard political reality. And there's this linguistic shift too, right? The country was also called Hind. Now, this actually derived from the Sanskrit word Sindhu, referring to the Indus River. It's a super important historical evolution because it shows us exactly how geography shaped the subcontinent's external identity to the rest of the world. Moving on to section 2, unearthing physical clues, archaeology, and epigraphy. Okay, let's look at the dirt and shovel side of things, specifically down in South India. Historians rely heavily on megaliths. Now, these are basically massive stone structures used as graves. But the key here is that they aren't just empty tombs. They contain the dead, buried alongside tools, weapons, and pottery. For a historian, a megalith is basically a time capsule. By analyzing these everyday items, we can literally reconstruct the early life, the technology, and the burial practices of southern India from way before extensive written records even existed. Now, what's really interesting when we jump over to epigraphy, this study of inscriptions, is the crazy distinction in the scripts themselves. Take the famous Ashokan inscriptions. They are not uniform. The Brahmi script is written from left to right, pretty much like English or Hindi today. But jump over to the northwestern inscriptions, and they use the Kharosthi script, which is written right to left. Keeping these geographical and directional differences locked in your head is an absolute must for prelims. Oh, and here's a super specific, highly testable fact you definitely want to jot down. Those ancient Ashokan pillars we just talked about, they were completely lost to time for centuries. Ironically, they were actually first rediscovered by the medieval ruler Firoz Shah Tughlaq right in the heart of Delhi. All right, section 3, Indian literary sources. We're looking at indigenous texts and their evolution. Our religious texts are foundational, obviously, but it's crucial to understand that they evolved massively. The Vedas span everything from the Rig Veda's early prayers around 1500 to 1000 BC to the complex rituals in the Atharva and Yajurvedas, all the way to the deep philosophical speculation of the Upanishads. And the epics? It's absolutely wild when you trace their growth. The Mahabharata didn't just drop out of the sky as a massive book. It started out as the Jaya Samhita, with about 8,800 verses, and over centuries it ballooned into the Sata Sahasri Samhita, with a staggering 100,000 verses. The Ramayana did the same thing, doubling from 12,000 to 24,000 verses. We have to always remember these sources reflect hundreds of years of continuous additions. Now, beyond the epics, we've got the 18 Puranas. Think of these as ancient encyclopedias that speak of the 4 ages, Krita, Treta, Dwapara, and Kali, and they give us vital dynastic history right up to the Gupta rule. Then we have our non-Brahmanical texts, and please pay really close attention to the languages and locations here. Buddhist texts were primarily written in Pali, which was the language of Magadha, but they were largely compiled in the 2nd century BC over in Sri Lanka, which brings us the 550 Jataka tales. Jain texts, on the other hand, were written in Prakrit and compiled much later in the 6th century AD at Vallabhi in Gujarat. Of course, not everything was religious. We have some incredibly critical secular texts. The Dharma Sutras laid out ancient laws. Kautilya's Arthashastra, divided into 15 books, gives us unbelievably rich material on Mauryan polity and the economy. Down south, the Tamil Sangam literature, compiled in these huge literary assemblies from the 1st to 4th centuries AD, is pretty much our primary source for early South Indian history. And we absolutely can't forget classical Sanskrit literature. Kalidasa gave us absolute masterpieces like Abhijnana Sequentilam and Megadutta, while Banabhabhata's Harshacharita serves as a vital semi-biography of King Harsha. Section 4. The Foreign Accounts. Eyewitness Testimonies. Okay, the absolutely crucial point for you guys here is matching the visiting traveler to the correct Indian king or era. These matchups are incredibly high yield for your exams. So, Megasthenes, a Greek ambassador, came to the court of Chandragupta Maurya and wrote the Indica. Fast forward, and we have the Chinese Buddhist pilgrims. Fa Xian visited during the early 5th century AD, right in the Gupta age, providing a crazy good window into their social and economic conditions. Later on, Xuanzang spent about 15 years in India during the 7th century AD under King Harsha, leaving us incredibly detailed accounts of the great University of Nalanda. And finally, Section 5. Fixing the historical chronology and tying this whole thing together. Remember that cold case I mentioned at the very start? How do we actually know the date of Chandragupta Maurya's accession? Well, this brilliantly illustrates the magic of historical research. Greek sources constantly talked about this Indian king named Sandracotis. It was the British scholar William Jones who had this massive aha moment. He realized Sandracotis was literally just the Greek pronunciation of Chandragupta Maurya. Because the Greeks recorded exact dates for their interactions, matching these names became the ultimate sheet anchor of ancient Indian chronology. It locked his accession precisely at 322 BC. So let's map this onto our timeline to build our wider historical framework. Ancient India didn't just have one single unified calendar. They had overlapping eras, which, yes, can be a total nightmare to memorize, but they are absolutely essential to know. Note these down for sure. The Vikrama Samvat began in 58 BC, the Saka Samvat began in 8078, and the Gupta era began in 8319. Pinning these highly confusable dates to your memory is honestly going to save you points on exam day. Now, you're probably wondering, did ancient Indians actually write history as we know it today? True historical sense, characterized by recording strict dates and linear biographies, actually emerged quite late. Two prime examples of this are Kalhana's Rajatarangini in the 12th century, which detailed the biographies of the kings of Kashmir, and Bilhana's Vikramaditya Charita, which highly eulogized the Chalukya king Vikramaditya VI. But all of this leaves us with a vital question to ponder as we wrap up. When we read texts like the Harsha Charita by Banabhata or the works of Bilhana, we are reading the words of court poets. Literally, their job was to praise their employers. How might their inherent bias alter our understanding of these ancient kings and timelines? It's a great reminder that a really focused learner doesn't just blindly memorize sources, they actively question them. So keep that critical lens razor sharp as you continue your prep. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep digging into the past.